Addictions. Addictions. I think we'll get to know what is into addictions. Is it just the cocaines and the weed that people can be addicted to? And I think a few times we've heard about addictions to masturbation and a whole lot, but I'm sure we'll get the root cause and hopefully how to be free from it as well without eating much into the time that is already spent. I invite our honorable Dr. Dr. Seth Asafo to take us to aka Kukus.
Happy Sabbath once again. Very good afternoon to us again. This afternoon, we want to talk about addictions. And I will move away from the ones we are used to, the alcohol and the cocaine and the marijuana and the heroin. But I want to talk more about what we call behavioral addictions. And these happen to a lot of us. Sometimes we don't even recognize that we are going through an addiction. Now, first of all, I want us to try and understand or define when they say an addiction, what exactly is an addiction. But before that, let's do a little experiment. For the whole time that we'll be having this talk, I want everybody to put their phone away. I don't want anybody to even read the scripture on their phone. I want you to just basically understand that the phone doesn't belong to you anymore. Now it belongs to me. And you'll notice that, just as I have said it, the thought of putting your phone aside is already making you feel a certain kind of way, true or false? And that is what an addiction is. Yes. It's very important. Children learn through exploration. He might become an engineer, so he's fascinated by the way things work. And so he's just testing it out. Now, whenever we talk about an addiction, we say that it is the narrowing of the things that give us happiness to one thing. it is more profound and it is sweeter in a sense. Today, the biggest addiction that we deal with as a nation and as a people is technology, our phone. And on the phone comes many different other addictions. So the phone is a conduit for an addiction, but then there are many subsets of addictions that we find, and it's implicated and affecting all of us in many ways. What is the biggest, most significant pandemic in addiction today in Ghana? It's sports betting, soccer bet. Every day in the clinic, there's somebody who is coming because we have to go and defend them in court and say that don't prosecute the person because the person has been gambling so much that now they have defrauded other people so they can gamble. And then the court will say it's a fraud attempt, they should go to jail. And then we say no, it is a brain disorder. Now, if you look at what happens in the brain, that reward system that I mentioned, every time you keep engaging in a behavior, it grows bigger and stronger. It becomes more macho, which means that to get away from addiction is not as simple as we think it is. Most of the time, we will say classically, jai. It's not that easy. When the brain gets used to excitement and you want to take it away from it, it punishes you. And that's what people call withdrawal. So the person who smokes marijuana, when they can't have marijuana, they have chest pains, they are coughing, they are sweating, they feel uneasy. That is punishment from the brain directly. The brain is saying, but you, what my dear na me there? I feel they also won't find me biome, and they make you. That's what happens in addictions. So the withdrawals that people experience are real. Now, before we used to think that it was only chemicals, and I say druboni, that brought about withdrawal. But today we realize that beyond cocaine, marijuana, the ekeka, even if you are on your phone consistently for a long time and you decide to stop, you cannot do. One of the biggest reasons why many of us are unable to sleep is because of the phone. Because there are so many things that steal what you call our selective attention. Now, you see, now, if you are paying attention to me, you are using what you call your selective attention. You are being intentional to listen to me. Now, what the phones and the devices and the social media platforms do is they steal that same selective attention so that your mind cannot move to any other thing except what you have to. How many of us realize that sometimes you pick up your phone and you wanted to check a simple message only to realize 3 hours later that you have checked messages and checked posts and checked so many other things. And you, in the process of doing that, you don't even recognize that that is what you are doing. And that's what the addiction sequence does. It makes it very difficult to see beyond the enjoyment of the pleasure that the addiction brings. And today is the behavioral addictions that we are struggling with. And most of us, we give it very noble names. So I have a lot of clients who I work with who do what you call forex trading. And they say that one is forex trading. I say it's gambling. You put money and the money will increase because you follow some signal. It is still gambling, but they say no. Now, last 2 years, we conducted an experiment, and in the experiment, we asked 2 important questions. Is gambling good or bad? And we had 95% of people saying gambling was bad. Then we came and asked another question. Is sports betting good or bad? And we only had 5% say it was bad. Because sports betting is not gambling. It's supporting your team. It's what they told us. The interesting thing is, everybody starts small. Now, let me explain the sequence of how people get addicted to behaviors. You start the behavior, and then the first one is, oh, okay, it was not bad. Then you engage again, then you realize, hey, the behavior is able to do a lot for me. It takes most of my problems away. I'm not thinking about the things I worry about. So at some point, you start to replace everything in your life with that specific behavior. And now when you can't have the behavior, your brain starts to punish you. Your brain will say, I need the behavior to function. Now, let's take ourselves, normal human beings. If you have a routine that you follow consistently, for those of us who work every day, you work Monday to Friday, and of course, the day of rest will come. When you're on leave, you only enjoy the first 2 or 3 days. After that, your brain starts, hey, so I'm not doing anything. No. You are addicted to your job, that's why. Routines are a precursor to any kind of addiction, except that we have functional routines. Going to job is functional. However, every other behavior, the more you engage in the behavior, the more likelihood that you can become addicted to that behavior. So someone ever asked me, is it bad to exercise? There are people who are addicted to exercise. If they don't go to the gym one day, their day is terrible. And they ask me, is that bad or is that good? Now, we only talk about addictions as problematic when they start interfering with your day. So when the addiction interferes with your regular sequence, then we say that it is starting to impair your functioning. And we'll normally look at it as, is it interfering with my work? Is it interfering with school? Is it interfering with my relationships? Is it interfering with my responsibilities? Then we start to say that there is some kind of addiction. So now, take me. I've gone to the gym. I've become macho. And because I'm macho, I consume a certain amount of food. And then I stop gymming. Does it mean that the amount of food I consume will reduce at once? Aha. So addictions are learned. And as they are learned, they build up the brain muscle for rewards. So the process of going about to go against them is also a gradual one. And that's what we have to understand. Now, addictions, like I said earlier, they are not a flaw in character. It is not that oye nipa boni intina oye addicted. And then you say oye weak person intina oye then oye addicted. If you repeat certain behaviors so consistently, addiction becomes normal. Now, I think 2 months ago, we talked about technology addiction within the church. And we want to zone in on that also. Because many of our children are getting addicted to technology. And it's transcending so many other aspects of their life because technology gives you a lot of stimulation. It makes you happy. It makes you hyper. And so when you have dealt with the technology, the screen, all the social media platforms, the games, the movies, the cartoons, and then suddenly you have to translate into something boring, like pen and paper writing, there's a problem. So there are a lot of kids today, they say, they are disrespectful. No, they are bored. The child's brain has gotten used to high stimulation. Why? When you give a child a screen, they are getting stimulation from sight, from touch, from their ear as well, because the movie or whatever is being shown on that screen is wearing up specific parts of their brain. Now, in the past, one of the things that, let me say, boringness did for the human mind is that it made it very imaginative. In today's world, how many of us type and worry about mistakes? When you are typing on your phone, do you worry about mistakes? Autocorrect will do it for you. To the point that when you have to spell, you get confused. Our brain is dulling up because something seems to be what? Replacing it. Now, when we were younger, I remember as for multiplication, because of mental, the teacher will come 3 times, 4 times. So our brains were sharp. Today, sometimes when I'm adding 3 plus 4 plus 8 minus 12, I will do the math, but I'll still check on my phone if it's correct. Why are we doing this? Our brains are dulling up because the high stimulations are great for us. So anything that seems boring challenges us significantly. Now, the other side of it is the technologies we have, especially the phones and the tablets, they make it difficult for children to develop the sense of imagination. Because in the past, when you are reading a storybook, you have to imagine the scenes. You have to imagine on a nice evening, the wind was blowing. You could imagine and feel it. Today, we don't have to imagine. The technology will do it for you. It gives you the scene. So our brains are dulling up. Now, when you look at the human brain, it has many different pathways. And for those of us who have ever been in the village, or sometimes even in our neighborhoods, every path, if there are bushes, the place that people walk consistently, it opens up. It creates a path. And it doesn't matter whether it's rain or shine, that path is still there. Same thing happens in the human brain. So every behavior you engage in, these pathways open, and the pathways determine whether the behavior will be consistent or not. It's so interesting that if a child is born and you don't expose them to light for about 2 weeks, they'll be permanently blind because the pathways for seeing, they close off. They die off and they go. So the more you do something, the better you get at it. The more you engage in any addictive behavior, the better you get at the behavior, and the stronger the addiction also what? Becomes for you. So the process of getting beyond any addiction is also gradual. Let's take technology and let's take our children. Many children today are addicted, so their grades are struggling. So when they go to school, schoolwork is boring, so they cannot concentrate. And then they'll say the child is hyperactive. They are moving around. Well, their brain needs a lot of jumping around because in cartoons, everything is the music that is playing, everything is. And so for it to be boring, it doesn't occur. Now, the same sequence of what we call immediate gratification is that now we want things like this. At the touch of your finger, sometimes when you are trying to open a website and it's delaying, you see the frustration you feel. But in the past, things were all, it required a certain process. I remember that when we were growing up, the landline was in our house. And I didn't like it ringing at all. Because whenever the phone rings, they will tell you to go and call Auntie Akosia, who lives like 20 minutes down. So now, you go and call Auntie Akosia, and then Auntie Akosia will come and wait for the call. Today, when even you call somebody and they don't pick, how do you feel? That's what immediate gratification does. It makes us want responses in the moment. And all these things push that sequence of addiction to the point that now, when you are not getting those responses the way you need them, your brain starts to punish you or tells you that you are not doing the thing that I need you to do. So, what are the things that cause addiction? Or when we say, are there causes of addiction? Yes, there are. There are addictions that are genetic. They run through the family. And a lot of our research is telling us that any behavior you have, you can write that behavior into your genes and you can transfer it to your child, which means that the child has a predisposition. So let's say that as a parent, I'm very fearful. And today's sermon was do not fear. Don't be afraid. I'm a fearful person, okay? My fear is written into my genes. And when I have a child, that child's mind recognizes fear a little more highly than every other child around. So the least thing, they can get what? Afraid. Same thing happens with addiction. If you're somebody, and so we find that it runs in many families. Families that have parents who are alcoholics usually have children who are alcoholics. And it's not because alcohol is at home. It's because their brain is a fertile ground for alcoholism, or they develop the gene of alcoholism. Let's say I'm that kind of person who cheats consistently. I'm always conning people to get one thing or the other. That smartness is written into my genes and I can transfer it. So when the ground is fertile, the child will also become part of it. Now, so we know the ones that come through the genes. And then there's also what we learn. Now, every time you engage in a behavior and you get a reward for the behavior, you are likely to do it again. And that's how a lot of people become manipulative. So let's say I want to ask Elder for something. Instead of coming to Elder and say, Elder, please, can you give me some money? I would rather come and say, Elder, it's not been easy. And I'll tell a story. I'll start from Jerusalem and move. Then Elder himself will say, things are hard, collect.
So in my mind, I'm sharp. So my brain starts to develop that sequence of don't go straight to the point. So every time I see Elder Odro to now come, yesterday something happened and I'll even pretend that I'm crying, knowing that Elder is very empathetic. Oh, and jikakra. What is happening is I'm being rewarded for the behavior. So my brain tells me that if I'm getting a reward, then it's not a bad thing. On the other hand, if I go to Elder and I start and say, open to what do you want? Because that behavior is punished, I now have to be what? Open. So when I come, I say, oh, Elder, I want this. Please help me. So every time a learning occurs, which is a reward, a behavior is also likely to do what? To continue. And that's why, for many people, we don't recognize this, but the salary you are paid is part of conditioning your behavior. So you work 30 days and you get something. That is a conditioning. That conditioning means that for a lot of people, so usually when we work with people who are going into retirement, who haven't done retirement planning, one of their biggest withdrawals is that they are not getting the same paycheck that they used to get. Because they are addicted to, after every 30 days, collect this amount of money. And now it will be, after 30 days, the money is halved, or you are not getting as much. And if you don't have a job that even has continuity, you have to live on your own. So then that becomes a worry for them. Now, we also know that a lot of people use addiction as a coping mechanism. So when I'm going through a challenge, I just want to forget it temporarily. Today, I have a broken heart. Instead of trying to deal with it, I drink 2 shots. The alcohol makes me forget about the problem for about an hour or 2. And then suddenly, my consciousness comes back and I realize the problem is there. So what do? I keep taking the alcohol every time I feel down. So I create a certain sequence. Now, if you are in pain and there's something that works for you to take the pain away, when you are in pain, what do? You go back to that same thing. And it happens a lot for many of us that when we are feeling uncomfortable, the first coping we do is our phone. Let me just go and watch something and distract myself. So for 6 hours, you are just scrolling. And your brain is also getting used to that sequence. So when you have a challenge, you cannot deal with the challenge. You'd rather cover your eyes like it doesn't occur. Now, you see, the animal ostrich, when it has a problem, what it does is that it buries its head in the sand. So when they use the expression to play ostrich, the ostrich says, because I cannot see the evil, it does not exist. But when the ostrich takes his head out, the evil will still be there. And so people also use addictions to cope with pain. It could be emotional pain, it could be physical pain. They are doing all these things just to mask the pain. And the addiction in itself becomes a pain because at some point in time, there is no excitement from the behavior anymore. You only need that excitement to feel normal. So if you chase happiness, say you want to be happy all the time, at some point, happiness will lose meaning. You can't be happy forever. The happiness becomes nothing. If you have never seen the other side. So I always tell my clients that when you are practicing gratitude, the automatic gratitude of saying, I thank God that I'm alive, it usually doesn't have enough power until you have heard that somebody close to you has passed. That's when your mind recognizes, hey, it could have been me. When you say, I thank God for shelter, the power of knowing that the shelter is a blessing is when you perhaps are driving by and you see somebody sleeping on the street and then the rain is beating them. That's when you notice. So we need the ups and downs in order for our brains to build that process of understanding context. Because if it were always happy, it would lose its bearing. Now, how do I know that I'm addicted to a behavior or to a substance? Number one, I spend a lot of time thinking about it. You spend a lot of time thinking about it. It could be a substance like marijuana, or it could be a behavior like watching television, or watching pornography, or gambling, or just being on your phone. Secondly, you would have tried on your own to stop the behavior, but you will be unable to do it. That's another thing. So there are most of us may recognize there's something that's a lot for me. It's so much, I want to stop, but I can't stop. That's also another symptom of an addiction. Then you also know that you start to hide it from other people. Now, if you're always on your phone, every now and then your friends will say, oh, they know phone so. Then you say, oh, Debbie, yes, I may check a message. You always keep making excuses for why what they are saying is not entirely the case. Or you hide the behavior from people. Now, we always say that every addiction thrives in secrecy. So the more you hide it, the more likely you are to get even more addicted. Then you also notice that even if the behavior causes detrimental effects to you, you still cannot stop. So we have lots and lots of people who are not functional at work, because when they get to work and they get bored, they open YouTube. Not that they are watching anything bad, except what they are watching does not translate into the job that they have to do for that day. So people start complaining, you are not putting out your output, you are not doing your homework. And they know the consequences, but they still cannot what? Do anything about it. And these tell you that the addiction is on the brain level. I tell you a story about a man. This man had gambled so much that his wife knew he was a gambler. He never had chop money. He was always broke. So their daughter was sick and was brought to our hospital in Kolebu. They had to do a surgery and they had to pay money. Daddy had Kojoto. He didn't have any money. So mommy gave her card to him and said, go and withdraw the money and come and pay the bill. So daddy took the card, withdrew the money. And when he had withdrawn the money, then he said, Sikawe de semitimi bono double. I was saying, so me sebe mantino. Mami could chabet quick, binamin jiskanumrana. So daddy went and gambled the money, and he lost it. And when he lost it, I mean, everybody would think once he had lost it, he would stop. He went and removed more money with mommy's card. To the point where the ATM said, you have exceeded your limit for the day. If not for God, that child would have died. So now, let's think about it. How is it possible that a father would see their own child in misery, almost dying, and decide to gamble? And that's why I keep telling people, addiction is much deeper than what we think it is. We think it's a behavior. We think it's just jai. Addictions don't work like that. They attack the inner core of your self-control. Now, are there things that make people more susceptible to an addiction? Yes. Age. Age is the number one thing. You see, until you are about 24 years, the part of your brain that is implicated or that you use for self-control is not fully developed. It is developing. So it's because it's not fully developed, anything you start engaging in, you are less likely to also control. That is the interesting thing. And this curiosity that usually builds in adolescence, like the teen ages, means that at that place, we want to experiment with everything. But at the same time, the power we want to play with, we can't control that power. And so a lot of people start the addiction journey early. Now, also because self-control is not built, there is more enjoyment in that activity or behavior during that time. I remember that I started driving very, very early. And nobody taught us in our house, the boys, nobody taught us to drive. We just woke up and we all knew how to drive. And those days, mommy and daddy will be telling you, you don't need to speed. It's not necessary. But it wasn't our fault. See, you had a heavy leg. So the moment you were on the street, the accelerator would drop. And today, I recognize that it was that thrill I used to get. Today, ask me how many times I speed. Even when it's necessary, you are very careful. Because there's no adventure in now. There are so many things that are grounded, and self-control has been built. So if someone engages in a behavior, and that's why the problem of technology is a huge one for many of us. We are giving our children devices. We don't know how dangerous these devices are. And the children also are in that state where they don't have control. Now, there are many rules that they give around how many hours a child should use a device for. And they'll tell you that from 0 to 2 years, your child should not use a device at all. From 0 to 2 years, no device at all. What do we find? We find that the neocortex, the brain, it starts to shrink. So now with the human brain, the bigger it is, and the rougher the surface, the more intellectually gifted you are. Now we find that children who are exposed to devices early, they have brains that, one, are shrinking. Number two, they have language deficits. So you notice that the children aren't speaking as early as you want them to. The children are quiet. Then you go to speech therapists, and when they come to me, I say, how long does your child stay on their technology? Do you know the problem with the device? The device does not allow two-way communication. And for language to develop, you have to do a two-way stream. So I speak to you and you speak to me. That's how children learn language. But now they are watching a device, and the device is saying everything, and they don't have to say one single word. So they can recognize objects, they just can't add symbols to it. So when their language development delays, it means their actual learning also delays. So that's also a huge thing. Now, let's move into adolescence. We're finding a lot of people having depression and anxiety and all the rest, ADHD, and their brothers and sisters, simply because when people are on their devices, one of the mistakes they make is they consistently think of what they see online as realities. But earlier today I was explaining, they are all settings. So you're looking at something and you believe that that's what the world should be. In many international schools where I work, a big challenge they have is motivation. Children are not motivated to do anything. And why does that happen? Well, the child tells me that, but why am I worrying myself with school? Everything I need, I already have. My father can pay my teachers, and so basically I should be CEO. There's no need to go through this process. And the mistake that many parents have done without noticing is, from our true desire to love and to care for our children, we overextend for them, we overdo for them, so the children never learn any of these things. There's a lack of problem solving. Now, for those of us who've been through challenges, you'll know that the challenge makes you recognize that you are capable. So when you go through a challenge, your brain builds a certain muscle to deal with that kind of challenge. Even people who go through trauma, when we put their brains under MRIs and CT scans and fMRIs, you notice that the portion of the brain that's implicated in resilience is much bigger. It has more macho. Because they've been through the challenge and they have overcome it. Now, self-worth or believing yourself only comes by doing. You can't be there and just say, I feel good about myself. It's not true. There's always a reason why you feel good, because you know your capabilities. Nobody can say, I feel good because of my mother and my father's money. Yes, people say that. But that is external self-worth, and it's not internal. Now, when children are not building this, what happens is they look for what we call maladaptive or short coping strategies. And they come back to the same technology, which is already stealing their selective attention. And because that attention is gone away, everything they are hyper-focused on are things that are largely non-productive. Do addictions affect men more than they affect women? No. It affects both men and women equally. Does addiction affect children more than it affects adults? No. It affects them equally. The difference, however, is that children may be more likely to be addicted to devices and drugs, whilst adults may be more likely to be addicted to work and chemicals. during COVID, we noticed that the issue of domestic abuse had been increasing significantly. Why? There was lockdown. Many people used to deal with their relationship challenges by going to work. And when they go to work and they close, they still stay at work. So you come home and your partner is asleep, then you also jump into bed. Then lockdown said, no, you all stay at home. And so the fight started. Because now that coping had been taken away from them. And then they now had to refer them to people like us to help them deal with it. Addictions are becoming more and more regular because human beings have more distractions and things that make us feel happy in the moment. Because the kind of excitement we get from dopamine releases, they are very temporal. Now, sometimes we confuse happiness and pleasure. Happiness is ethereal. It's in the background. It's always there. But it's not profound. Pleasure is very visceral. It's huge. And then it drops. So for a lot of people, the more pleasure you seek, the more pain you actually get. In the human brain, there's something we call the pain-pleasure balance. So it's like a seesaw, okay? And it always attempts to be straight. However, every time you gain pleasure and it drops, the brain automatically must make sure that it retains the balance. So what does it do? It increases your threshold for pain so that it can bring the balance even. Except in every case, the balance will tip lower. So when you seek pleasure, the rebound effect is that you get more pain. And then when you are in more pain, the least things give the most joy. So boredom is necessary for thriving. Silence is necessary for thriving. Now, at the top of some of the most sophisticated mental processes is silence. How many of us are able to keep silent in our mouth and in our mind? How many of us are able to do that? There is nothing you are thinking about. Most of us will start, I'm not trying to think about something. Before you know, your mind is already moving. And that tells you that the fortitude you have is there, but it's limited. Now, I tell many people that every time you try to be present, you find your mind drifting apart, and you're able to bring it back. That is a start. There are people who would start wandering, and the mind goes and never comes back. And these things happen simply because we are chasing pleasure and not happiness. Even within the Christian race, they say there is a path. And I remember we used to have this book, my book of Bible stories. And there was this picture towards the end where there was a very large road. And at the end of that road, there were horns. So a man wearing horns, the classical depiction of Satan. And there was another road, very narrow, with tongues and all of that. But at the end of that road was a castle. And what it tells me today is, it is not necessarily for everything to be perfect. What is most important is the recognition that even within the challenge, you can create a perfection for yourself. I tell you my own story. I was transferred for some reasons I didn't understand. And I had to be traveling to Koforidua every single day. And I knew why that was being done. But I'll come back to Accra and tell the people who transferred me, Koforidua is nice. What? The food there is very, very good. In fact, I am going to move my family to Koforidua. So then they said, okay, you want to be stubborn. So they sent me to Tamale. Koforidua, you were driving in and out. Tamale to do it and let's see. God being so good, I got into Tamale, and then the news was there's some psychologists who had come. And you know, Tamale has the highest number of NGOs in the whole of Ghana. Hey, the way I cash out. Every day there was an intervention to do. And then I'll come back to Accra with guinea fowl. Come and give to my people and say, Tamale is good. Yeah, I'm farming now. I have cattle. I have this. This people say, oh, sir, okay, we'll show you again. So they moved me a little further from Tamale. For those of you who know Sola, See, it's before, after Solar, you go to Fufusu, then you move towards Wa. Now, a whole consultant, they put me in a CHIPS compound. Nothing. I mean, CHIPS compound is the barest minimum in the healthcare system. Okay? And I will go. And when I went there, I noticed that farming was very, ripe there. So I said, let me farm some, man. I also realized that cattle too was there. I said, let me find cattle there. Then I realized another important thing. The CHIPS compound barely did nothing. But I started organizing myself. I would use the same CHIPS compound motorbike and go to the villages and do stress management for teachers. And then I heard from the district director. Suddenly, I started getting NGO jobs again. So I started turning the adversity consistently into victory until they say you come back to Accra. You are where you are. I think you are enjoying too much. You see, sometimes when we're going through challenges, what we try to do is to want to find a quick fix. And a quick fix would have been, I will not do the job again. I would have avoided it. But I said, okay, but it doesn't kill me. There's cow here, guinea fowl. I like the tozafi also. I started to find little things in there that gave me energy to move on. And the best part was fufu was not expensive. You buy fufu meat 2 cedi, they give you 2.